call to order, and want to take attendance? Sure.
Okay, Councilmember Wynn,
Here.
Councilmember Burns. Is he there? Yeah. Councilmember Kelly,
Here.
Councilmember Newsma,
Here.
Councilmember Reed,
Here.
Chair Livingston,
Here.
Member McMillan,
Here.
and Member Riker.
Here.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. So I think that we have a quorum, and I guess we'll go with public comments, right?
Yep, we didn't have anybody virtually.
Okay. Do we have anybody public comment?
All right, I'm Tricia Conley, I live in the second ward. And, I've looked a lot through this budget, although I certainly don't have the background any of you do, but as a resident, I have some concerns. And I would really like to request that the Finance and Budget Committee prepare a written report that recommends money for projects in the budget going forward that are clearly outlined. For example, in this budget, there were references made to a 2022 bond. That was very confusing. I feel it was misleading personally, and I think that needs to be fixed for years going forward. We also need clarity for the public on actual debt with bonds and the police and fire pension fund with an explicit narrative explaining and graph images showing us visually what that looks like. I further like to request that you make the push for us not to issue any more bonds in 2023. Please recommend using our excess reserves. On a connected but maybe not so in front of us note, we have the library that is looking to levy more money. Our parks and rec, there's a lot of parks that were on the CIP budget. And the question for me also in those two areas is we have 5 TIF districts. And I would love us to get to the bottom of what is costing us when we have 5 TIF districts and those tax receipts or that money remains flat for both our library and our parks because any increment is going into the TIF, I'll call it slush fund. So I think it would be really interesting and important for us to have the knowledge for those areas that are remaining flat with parks and also our library. What are they not getting that is now being put on the taxpayers to fund because they're not receiving the increment over 20 plus years? The TIFs in our town last 23. It's worth knowing that. So that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ray Friedman, Second Ward. If you don't mind me asking, I sat next to Leslie yesterday at City Council meeting, and I was wondering if you got all the paperwork, all the documents that you need, that you were looking for. That's my first question. Second question is, why are we not spending money that we actually have or that we know that's coming in? We're constantly borrowing money year after year. I know Mayor Haggerty said every year we take out general obligation bonds. Well, when I moved here, as I said before, that 6 years ago, general obligation bonds were $100 million. After we voted on Robert Brown, now general obligation bonds are $200 million. It looks like we are spending, tell me if I'm wrong, it looks like
Yeah, I gotta fix it up. You're right. Little sloppy.
Someone is not on mute. It's on.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Bob.
Yeah, right. Sorry.
Can you mute? Can someone mute if
Bob,
you're
can
on?
you mute?
Please mute yourself if you're online.
Bob can mute everyone,
I
can't you?
muted him.
Okay, great. Sorry. I'm sorry, Ray, please.
It looks like our general bond, our debt is about 200 million, but debt service, and I thought, okay, $15 million a year, but it looks like it's $24 million a year for debt service, which would be about $2 million a month we're paying in debt service. That's astronomical. So, okay, so I'm wondering, I know the property taxes have not been, the bills haven't been sent out, so I guess we should have a rough estimate of what property taxes, the income that we would get on that. So I'm wondering if we could, figure out approximately how much money do we have coming in as opposed to how much money we're spending. It seems like we're always short by millions of dollars, or we should have millions of dollars in excess, but we don't. Where did it go? So what I want to know is if we are, as I asked yesterday at City Council, if we're increasing the city budget from last year, 293 million, to next year, 400 million, we're increasing the budget by about 25%. So is our income 25% greater? Is it expected to be next year 25% greater than it was last year?
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of that increase is the water, the water project, which is sort of separately funded.
Isn't it being federally subsidized, the water project?
Water, I believe so. I think the water's almost.
There's not, it's low interest loans through the state.
Yeah. So that's.
But I don't think the numbers tie into our budget.
So, yeah, I was focused more, okay. Anyway, thank you.
But about the water bill,
Yeah.
Hitesh was saying that basically with all the new clients that we have that we're selling water to, that should be paying for itself, or we should be making money on that. Actually, our bill, water bill should be going down. Right, Hitesh?
I mean, I don't want to comment on this,
Yeah.
just, this is part of what
You
you
want me
comment,
to-
I would rather
Yeah,
cover it as a
okay,
part
why
of
don't we get into this, we'll get into the presentation, and maybe we'll get into some of those elements. Okay, great.
I mean, I'd be fine, I just feel like, so it's not too segmented to the fund, to water, maybe.
Why don't we see if it comes up during the meeting, okay? During the, presentation, all right? Okay. Right, so, you were gonna take us through, I mean, I've noted, and you sent me these
We want to do
materials.
the approval of the minutes.
Oh,
before
sorry,
we get
yes,
into that.
we'll do the approval of the minutes. So everybody have a chance to review the minutes from this one? Everybody, okay with them? A
I'll move
motion to approve?
I'll move approval of the minutes from October 11th.
Right, and, okay, vote?
All in favor?
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. So, pass? Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so let's bring it to the presentation. I will let Clayton would go through, and I will hear questions about water bills, the property tax, pensions, and anything and everything related to 23 budget. So, go ahead.
Okay, I've seen much of this presentation before, so I will skip slides that I feel like have been covered and only focus on those where we need additional details that are requested. So,
I would focus primarily on sort of the improvements you've made to the budget since.
And so just tell us,
original
yeah, I mean,
submission.
some of those things like dollar bills and all that, we don't want to, take away your time on the same thing, but we can focus on some of the things which you want.
so focusing first at the high level, last time you saw this total budget was 402 million. Last time you saw it, as we presented to City Council last night, we've identified some positions to reduce, just the property tax increase. We'll go into the line-by-line changes to take us from the 402 million to 400 million. This does represent a $40 million increase from the 2022 adopted budget. As you stated earlier, Chair Livingston, most of that increase is in the water fund for that water intake project. It's paid for with federal and state loans. Those loans are to be paid back by our water wholesale customers in full. So the taxpayers not cutting their bill necessarily, but they're not taking on the cost of that project. They're not paying for that water intake project.
So are
In terms
those
of
like
timing,
an IRB or what?
No, it is a BPI program. It is first time I think they've come up with that. And I think there are only 2 communities in the Illinois which have kind of been qualified, I think, because there's an interest, low interest and all this.
Yeah, it's a subsidized rate.
So Joliet is the other
2%
city.
rate or something
Yeah.
like that.
So we got it.
We still include it as an expense, even though we're getting.
You see the revenue in the budget, and you see the expense. You see the
But the
revenue.
thing is, coming back to that answer, that, okay, and as he said, we won't see there won't be any net increase on the Evanston residents because of this loan, because this would be paid for by the wholesale customer. Now, when would they start paying it? This is like a 2 to 2.5 year, 3 year project. And once it kicks in, we will have to include that in our billing. So it would be probably 3 years from now when we would have first included this debt service charge in the wholesale customer. Because first we have to have the project completed. And depending on the weather, because it's like a mile-long intake in the lake. So, and I think Paul Mayano is our project manager. But yeah, it could be easily 2 to 3 seasons before we get that going.
Right. And do we start paying interest before it's placed in service, or?
I mean, we capitalize the interest and then finally we start there.
But it's not a significant cash flow drag during this initial period.
Right.
Another significant increase is in the capital fund. Ms. Biggs gave a presentation on the capital projects at last night's meeting, and we have not made the changes based on her reduced capital plan yet in our presentation. Based on the conversation yesterday, that seems like that's the direction we're heading to reduce.
How much do you think you'll reduce?
Ms. Biggs' presentation last night walked through the number. I don't know the
Right,
exact
right.
number.
I mean, she may say that, okay, we can do like every year down to from 24 million to $9 or $10 million. But again, she's waiting for the city council's specific direction, and I think that could happen on 14th, the Monday night.
Is that what she said, from 24 down to about 9 million?
I mean, that's what I think my conversation, but I,
17 million.
That represents the full amount as the budget was released on October 17th.
so yeah,
And so now we think it will be substantially less.
Right.
Than
Right.
17.
And again,
It could be,
that-
like, that's what we're in the process of discussing and deciding.
right,
And that's all funded with bond, that's all bond funded, correct?
yes. If we want to do that, because we haven't issued the bonds for 22,
No, I mean, it was all listed as a 23 bond.
right.
So.
Well, from
That's how
yesterday,
much
some of it
is
was
rolling off.
22, some of it was 23, some of it was grant.
Right.
And there was no 22 bond.
Right.
Pritesh, how much is running off the balance sheet next year in terms of bonds?
Around $10 million every year.
So when Laura explained it to me, it was sort of like, oh, 10 come on and 10 go off.
No, Miss,
So, I mean, that's,
let me just
I mean,
explain
Tracy,
here.
you were in that meeting.
But in
that's what
the,
she said.
yeah, I wasn't there. What we try to do, like is self-imposed limit, that generally we pay off $10 million in principal every year. So we reduce our debt by 10 million. So we try to limit to a new bond issue of 10 million, so we are not adding any incremental debt to our existing.
Yeah, but the problem with that math now is you're adding to incremental interest expense because you're issuing them at twice, probably 3 times.
Again, I mean, I hear that loud and clear. It is the city council who will say, yeah, do the project,
Yeah,
Right.
do the funding. Yeah, I mean, when she said that I could bring it down to 9
Yeah, that's
million, it won't include, I think, probably any of the parks. That's what she said, so,
Let's keep going.
yeah.
so just one quick
We're gonna
question,
get to
let's
the
just run that.
No, I think we have to,
Do we know
Important
from
question,
20?
Yeah, but I think we'll probably have it,
Okay, so
be able to have that discussion when we get to that page.
How long we get to that? No, like the debts that are rolling off this year. Is it 10, because it would be a 20-year bond, right, from
20,
2004?
2004.
Is that the ones that would roll off, the 2004 series?
No, every year
Every
we pay
year,
roughly
every
10
bond,
million in
something's
dollars
rolling
No, I
in
understand,
principal.
but usually they're 20-year bonds.
Right.
So the ones that would roll off.
And
next
they
year.
pay over 20 years.
Right.
Right, so they pay,
But they're
it's not
staggered.
20 at the end, it's every year has
Okay.
a tranche.
the amortization.
No, I
Right.
understand that, so, but I mean, some years we issue, I mean, I don't think it's the same every single year, it's not always 10 million.
And every $10 million principal payment every year, yes, average. It could be 9.5, it could be 11.5.
We can get to the capital projects here, but just one point. Are we to the point where we're likely not gonna be calling bonds as well, given the current interest rate environment?
Yes,
So that,
yes, I mean, when we were supposed to issue the bonds earlier this year,
yeah,
and we looked at the savings, there was some negative arbitrage.
right. So where we are today, that we will let additional bonds just stay in place and not call them until the rates and generally, we could refinance them later, right? It's not
Right.
just a single call, right? So, given where rates are now, we have some flexibility here, because normally they're callable at 10 years.
Right.
Right, but obviously, we're not gonna call them if our current borrowing rates are higher, so we would just leave. So that will help as well,
Yeah.
relative to
But what were
the
they 10
interest
years ago?
expense.
I mean, it's a high coupon and considering the current market, I mean, and again, as I said, like our typical schedule is every year we start working with the bond council in June and with the bond sale in August and close in September. So when we looked at it, there wasn't much savings.
And
Right.
it's gone up since.
No, we
I
retire.
assume
Right,
they probably
right.
called all the ones
Right,
that
we
were really
wouldn't call,
high.
I mean, of course we wouldn't.
But here,
I traditionally call them the minute we can, because rates have been so low, you
Right,
want to
right,
call them
right,
immediately.
right,
Now we're
right,
to the
right,
point
right.
where,
it depends on the market. Like 2 years back, when we refinanced some bonds, 10 million or so, we saved $2.5 million.
Yeah. Lot.
right.
Which is better.
So with this reduced capital fund, do you think it's possible that we will also be able to avoid a debt issuance in 23?
No, because think about it. 22 projects were approved by the city council.
Yeah.
But they did not approve the bond issue, which was supposed to be funded by 22 bonds.
Mm-hmm.
So if the city council say, yeah, go ahead with that project, where would the money come from?
But how much, what do you believe the timing is? Then we'll move on to capital projects.
No, this is-
What do you think the timing is of a bond issuance in 23, and for how much? With a revised
So
capital
they had
fund?
24, and he's saying it's down to 9 now. It
I
was.
mean, that's what I think, again, I'll have to check with Lara, but I think,
So, but David, I think that's an instruction that should be given from here, is to hold off on issuing even 9, because they are, so. it
Well,
was
let's
gonna be
issue,
20
let's understand what it is,
Yeah.
right?
Right,
I mean,
but
how
it was
late in
gonna
the
be
year can we
24.
last, and how, you know?
I mean, right around the last conversation I had with Lara, in light of this interest, she said, yeah, we could be fine until the late spring, so around May, June.
Okay.
And
So
at
far,
that
let's get an
point-
update on that for the next.
Oh, yeah.
When do we think? And also, we asked you to look at, we have a lot of cash, right? We sort of have a grossed up balance sheet, so being able to bring the cash down as well to avoid the debt issue.
So here's the thing, and again, I mean, I would tell again, I mean, I've been repeated, and I think that the question came out somewhere and say, oh, we have 76 million surplus for last year. Unlike the private sector, we cannot consider the one part as a, okay, we can do anything. Each fund has its own restrictions, so I cannot take money from sewer fund and put it in, or take it from TIF.
No, but there's the unassigned by the audit. That was
Right.
31 million.
That was 31 million as of the end of last year. I know you used 11.5
0.5 for the.
when we just.
I mean, let me just tell, yeah.
Okay.
And then you can ask me.
Do the algebra for us.
So the CIP fund, in this case, we look at the CIP fund balance. The capital project fund, which is our fund 415, it has around $10 million fund balance. But this is all kind of accounted for previous projects
Yeah.
for which we haven't made the payment, so we are sitting on cash.
Right.
Now, Lara just told me that she received the first invoice for some 1.2 million from IDOT. And there are like almost 6-7 million due to the IDOT. If we get those payments, say, next couple of months, then I'll have to really seriously think about having some draw on the line of credit, which we have with the Byline Bank right now. Or think about if the interest rate improves, market improves, and we have some stability, kind of normalcy, somewhere around, say, March, April, and look at the geo bond rate. Obviously, it would be discussed here and every month where we are, if we are thinking about it. But that's where I am right now, in terms of
So
point.
I think we just really want to know the projected year-end unassigned balance, because that is unassigned money. And I talked to our auditor at length, and the IDOT money is assigned. So to be really clear, that's how when they
But it is different.
overspending by 11.5 million,
Right.
as Kelly then said, no worries, because we have over $30 million in surplus. So we were able to then pay that 11.5 million out of that unassigned fund.
Councilmember Kelly, first thing is you are combining two things. When you talk about unassigned fund, it is a general fund. When we talk about these projects, we are talking about fund balance for fund 450, capital project fund.
So let's get into the capital fund,
Right.
but also I think as a follow-up,
Uh-huh.
I think we all want to delay any bond issuance as much as we can.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I agree with you.
So let's get into, what's your best current view, once we get the budget and your cash flows and available cash? Are we March, are we June, how big is it, if we
It
don't call
depends,
anything?
the biggest driver would be the chair, how much capital projects they approve as a part of 23.
Okay, so let's get into the capital.
And then to David's point, I think the other goal is really managing our cash more efficiently.
Right.
And reducing our balance sheet.
Yeah.
And that's what we are doing right now. Like, suppose what happened, I asked Lara that what you been doing since we don't have the geo bond fund? What we are doing, think about it. We are drawing upon our existing fund balance. Even though that fund balance is accounted for some projects, but we are using just the time gap we have. That IDOT is not billing us, we have that cash available for now, we are using it.
But we need to know that as a council, so when you're drawing on other funds that weren't, if we said, last year we expected to issue a 22 bond, but we didn't, we need to know when we're spending from another area. I mean, I think that's really, important, that we're privy to that. It's not just, like I know the year before we had 16 in unassigned and money was taken from that, but that's why we agreed last year that quarterly we get projections of both surplus and overspending in any area, whether it's CIP or anything else, I think, so that we have a sense as to where we're drawing from.
So let's go through the capital.
Capital project.
But we don't have the capital project.
Or what about, the reduction, the proposed reduction? Do you have anything on that? Or
Let's go over
what's
the
the change?
change.
We can come back to that too at the end, because
Okay.
I don't have that in the presentation, but I can pull up Laura's presentation from yesterday if you like.
Got it.
This is just a reminder of the $14.1 million general fund surplus that we're expecting at the end of FY '22. This was pulled using September month-end financials. We are in the process of pulling October financials, so
I assume that's consistent with this.
it's consistent with that.
Maybe I think this will be a good one if we can bring it up later.
It's in the presentation in
Okay.
like 5 slides.
Got it.
So,
Can we stop, it? Even though we have an overall surplus, do we look at each one
We
of
do.
these?
yes, so the
Okay.
$14.1 million surplus in the general fund is inclusive of salary and benefit savings. It's inclusive of revenues that are overperforming, like the real estate transfer tax, the personal property replacement tax, but it also takes into account those revenues that are underperforming, like our motor fuel tax, our telecom tax. So once you net all of that, that's where we're at the $14.1 million.
Can you back up?
Yeah,
a second? So will we have to do a budget amendment to account for, officially report those expense items where we've gone over budget?
Yeah, so this would be something where we would come back, it's Evanston policy to come back around April, to do the budget amendment. And so if we truly do come in at 119 million as projected, as we've shared
Right.
in this presentation, then that would come back as, council approval.
All right, so for that, for the,
Insurance back.
the 13%, the service and supplies, the transfer, everything that we've been over, any of these items that are above 100%
Yes.
would require a budget amendment.
So we come into the detail, if you look at our last year's budget amendment, we highlight, pick the top 10 items, that's why these are each individual items, which were higher more than 100,000. And we will explain it in our budget memo.
Okay.
What's in chargeback?
Chargeback.
Sorry?
What's in that?
Yeah, the,
Insurance and chargebacks, that's the pensions. So that's the transfer from the pension money from the general fund to the pension
Police and
fund.
fire pensions.
And it's also workers' comp and
so why is it so low compared to the budget?
Which one?
the year-to-date
14
rate
million versus 24 million.
14 million.
versus the 24.
Yeah, because the second installment of property tax is not there. What happens is the police and fire pensions, they get the money, but it is a kind of, for accounting purpose, we have to route it through general fund. So it is a revenue in general fund and it is an expense in the
So
general.
that 14 million may not be right, because if we,
By year end,
last year.
by year end, this will be 24 million. I mean,
Yeah,
we're not
yeah.
holding back.
That's the property tax what you don't have yet.
okay.
Right, when that comes in, it'll route through here. So that, yeah, that number should be
Clayton,
low.
you said something that made my ears perk up. You said it's Evanston policy to come back in April and adjust the budget. In discussions with folks from Skokie, it doesn't seem to be this mechanism for just kind of going over budget and then
So
kind of retroactively approving that.
this is the list of things that are causing this over budget primarily. And these have all been individually approved by city council throughout the year. So this is 4.8 million in items that the city council approved this year that were not budgeted for. And they approved use of fund balance shown as a revenue balance of the general fund, a purchase of a fire truck, wage increase, a transfer to the solid waste fund. So these all have come to city council for
So the only
approval.
issue is transparency. So we've been asking, last year, we did ask that we be apprised of overspending by fund, not by line items, by fund. I don't think
why we would report at the fund level, because that's where you.
But hold on, we are way underspending at the general fund level. So I don't think that's
So I'm
the
saying,
question you
the
meant.
amend, what do we have to amend? Which fund balance?
Without these things that are posted on the board, the general fund would be under budget. It's only because of these individual things that have come to city council that have pushed the
These
general fund
individual
over budget.
funds, yeah.
In those individual spending areas, overall, the
And they
general
made
fund
those
is
decisions
under budget by
knowing
$14 million.
that there was surplus, right?
Right.
Right.
Well,
Right, and council was told when approving each of these individual items, what the impact on the budget was,
Right.
Right.
right? I think that could be made a little bit more clear. Right, and I would like this committee at some point to circle back around to our reporting, conversation.
Yeah, you and I worked on that, yeah.
Because I think that might really, really help communication and transparency if we do a better job of conveying the data that it's available to us. It's just not packaged and presented in such a way that it's.
Well, we got it
acceptable.
down to like 4 pages.
Oh, yeah.
No, like, that's not a conversation for
Right.
tonight, but I'd like to have this committee focus on that.
Okay.
Fairly soon.
What is the other
all right,
side?
so 14, so this summarizes our, changes to the general fund revenues. We've already talked about some of the big, revenues that are going up. This summarizes the expenses.
Wait, can you go back to was that MFT, what's that?
The $1 million reduction, so this was $1 million that, over the last few years, MFT has been inflated because the state has been providing these, Rebuild Illinois state bond funds to the city. We got our last of those payments this year, so we expect revenues in that fund to go back down to normal levels next year. And over the past few years, we've been taking advantage of that increased revenue in MFT to help support the general fund. So with that revenue going down, we're pulling that transfer. This is the expenses. We've already talked about the wage increases. New positions, last month when you saw this, I believe it was 22.5. We've identified 2.5 general fund positions as well as 2 positions in the fleet fund that we were able to remove from the list of requests. In terms of one-time expenses, we've pulled the cardiac monitors and fire, those can make it another year. And we've increased the vacancy adjustment from 2% as proposed last month up to 4% after further discussions with this committee and with the city council. So this is a kind of a side-by-side
What did
showing
that total to real quick?
the
All
vacancy
those
adjustment.
proposed changes?
So that's on this slide in a little
Oh,
better
okay.
detail too.
Okay, thank you.
So on the left side, you see the original budget balancing revenues and expenses, and on the right side, you see the proposed budget as it is today, revenues and expenses. As you can see, going from top to bottom, we increased the projected tax revenues after taking a closer look at a couple of those. We're using less of the 2021 excess reserves in order to balance the budget, and we eliminated the net property tax increase for the general fund. So you see that there. We cut new positions down from 2.2 million to about 2 million. The one-time expenses, that's the cardiac monitors and fire that we've deferred. You see, we've moved a couple positions in speaking with the Health and Human Services Department from the general fund to the Human Services Fund. That fund has a nice, healthy fund balance, so we're able to move those positions. And those positions align a little more closely with the intention of that fund. They're social service driven, and so we're proposing to move those there. And then we increased the vacancy adjustment from 2% to 4%, and that brings us from 1.5 to 3 million. Total general fund revenue or total general fund expenses at 122.9 million.
So the vacancy adjustment is a reasonable assumption.
I mean, for at least next year, I think so, yeah.
Right. I mean, if you're starting
Usually he'd be on
what?
$1,000.
with the new positions at 9 or 10, 4 is probably still.
And we would be
Probably still
considered it's
some room.
aggressive in normal years, but considering the many positions open in the police department, we think 4% should be okay.
I think back in the day when they used to do it, even, they would regularly, I think it was 5%. I'm not saying it
You
should
can
go
see that
higher.
be 5%. And this is just price and management. I would still, semantics on the schedule, I would still say you're still using 21 excess reserves. So in some ways, we still have a deficit, right, from 4.6 to 3.1. You've made a lot of improvement, but we are still using excess reserves to balance the budget.
One other thing I did want to point out here on that 3.1, we've identified 1.2 million in our budget that is a one-time expenditure as well. So things like that fall off next year. So the 3.1 is actually 2 million plus these 1.2 million in one-time expenditures that have been identified. So just worth mentioning. I don't.
And again, the one thing in light of that, compared to this year, just the 1 or 2 items, we balanced 22 budget with the help of 4.25 million from ARPA. There is no ARPA money here. So that's the big one, because the city council wants for some other program. So obviously, we haven't shown any transfer from ARPA fund to the general.
Okay, but would you agree that if we're starting at this base of 3.2, use of prior reserves, you think there's a reasonable possibility we'll end up using less than that as the year rolls out?
It could be.
Yeah.
If the vacancy wise, yeah, I mean, we will see, hiring and if the labor market stays this strong and tight. And because this year, yes, it sometimes it took 3, 4, 5 months to hire one person and replace, and somebody, so you're right, yeah.
How aggressive would you view the revenue projections?
I mean, the revenue, I would tell you two things. I mean, there are both theories. You must have seen that inflation, recession, right? And when I talked to our peers for last few months, and I just read somewhere when, I mean, some which community we just passed the budget, that is the one concern, that if the inflation goes down to a normal of 2%, we could lose some revenues in that sense, and we have the kind of high numbers in 21, 22. So if we say, yeah, let's make them as a kind of base and kind of increment. So we'll get more idea, I think, come around maybe spring after a couple of Fed rates, that we'll see whether, yeah.
So having gone through this for a year now, I think it would be really good improvement for next year if we could improve the sort of constant reforecasting of the year.
Right.
And where are we, and do we have to make some expense adjustments? Or are revenues coming in a bit better than we thought? And, are we hopefully not gonna end up with the 3.2 deficit sort of?
Because the one thing I was concerned in the property tax side, that I saw the numbers came out for 21, county has been so late. So that we have lost $250 million in EAV this year for 21. Now, at the same time, I heard, I think, the assessor, that the 22 numbers could go up by 30%.
Right.
If they go up by 30%, and the school districts which are limited by the PTEL, the law, property tax extension limitation law, where they could go either CPI or that, they could go 5%, which is the maximum allowed, plus the new construction. So, because this would happen this year too. I was talking to District 65 CF when they say, yeah, we are going to go with the 5% because inflation is 8.9, so we are allowed. And so if the EAV goes up, I mean, if the values goes up, assessed value goes up 30%, and if both the school districts go up by their maximum allowable tax levy, that could be a little bit kind of a worrisome, but we'll see how things wrap up, because
But our levy is our levy, right? We don't raise.
Levy are the levy, but yes, that's city.
Yeah.
But what the school district is, they don't want to give up something like, okay, they would just say, okay, we'll raise by 2%, when they are allowed to go 5%. And, but
They're so funded.
right, and, but I read that these numbers are before the appeals, before the Cook County Review Board and the Board of Review. So we'll see some, because 2 years back, after the review, the assessed value has come down drastically.
But again, those new assessed values don't affect our
Right,
No,
correct.
general fund.
23.
I did a whole presentation on that with 6KB also.
Okay, good. So it seems to me good that you have shrunk from the original, what I would call deficit, 4.6 to 3.2. And there's probably still more room in the vacancy adjustment and maybe in the
Sorry to interrupt, some of the 3.2 are also one-time expenses too, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So
They're not regular, ongoing.
I think it'd be great if quarterly going forward, how do you feel about the year at the end of March? How do you feel about the year, really, where are we guiding towards?
And we would do that, as we said, that we do the monthly reporting. Obviously, as I said, these numbers are not static.
Yeah.
We will continue to see that, how the Cook County, the state government, and our economy overall affect this, and we'll continue to update.
So we can keep. I mean, any other thoughts on that? I mean, they have made improvements, and I think that's sort of. Well, that's why I would use the use of excess reserves. You really should put that down to a -4.5 and a -3.
Okay.
Right.
That's how I would do it, but.
Yeah, it just didn't look right to me.
I agree.
Right.
And that's why I explained the two major things, right? What we did in 22 balanced the budget, 4.2 million from ARPA.
Right, I know, but that's,
And $1 million rest of the fund balance, which was proposed for 22. So we
Then we can
basically
numbers all day.
used $5.2 million.
It's hard not to
Yeah.
see that.
Okay, so So here's the,
So this is what you requested, Chair Livingston. I don't know if you have anything you want to discuss on this.
well, I just think it's a good way to look at it, right? That we, sort of a multi-year view, and we've gone from the 4.6 to the 3.1. I think, it would always be good for all us to understand, to get more details. So down here, where it says net, that's your deficit.
Okay.
Where it says net.
Was this
That's
emailed
really-
out earlier?
I sent it to Sherry. It was not,
We can share.
I didn't send it to everyone. So there's really two schedules here that we talked about.
Yeah, you can share with everybody, then we're in session.
Yeah,
Presentation.
okay. It's what he just talked about, right? That the net number is sort of that deficit. So the use of the reserve. So big reserve buildup in 22 based on the current projection of 14, original budget, net deficit of 4.6, and now it's 3.1 for the reasons he just went through, that Clayton just went through, relative to the expenses and the revenues. And
Do you historically pass a budget that has a deficit?
It's not
Yes.
General fund, we try to keep it balanced, yeah. Some of the other funds where it doesn't matter, yeah.
I mean,
But I mean,
it shows
routinely-
a balance because you're using the fund balance to budget it, but as Chair Livingston said, this would be a deficit.
But it has to be amended. I mean, routinely you come back to amend the previous year before the audit.
Those are two separate things, council member. When we pass the budget as a proposed budget or adopted finally, it is almost always the balanced budget. Now, like say, how did we balance 22? We showed 4.5 million. We were still short $1 million. So we said use of fund balance. Now, technically, it's not a revenue.
No, I understand that there's the excess, but my point is that you have to have it amended, because it exceeds. I mean, we have to amend it. We
No,
amended it
so we need
11.5.
to amend the budget if our actual expenditure is higher than the budgeted expenditure. But it could happen that, okay, our actual expenditure is higher than actual revenue. That's the deficit.
All right, no, I understand.
Right.
But I understand that. But it does have to get amended for simply exceeding what was budgeted. Even
Yeah.
though, yes, I understand that, it's not a
Right.
deficit because we have a big cushion.
fund by
Big
fund,
cushion.
fund by fund.
But she's,
Right.
But
Fund
you
by
guys
fund,
are
correct.
comfortable passing a budget with a $3 million deficit?
Or use of, use of the available.
We're gonna have to. So, but I guess I wanna know too, like, I know between this time and then December 31st of last year, there was a big difference in the amount that we actually had in surplus and unassigned money. Do we have any like projections? Because I know, like, for example, when we come back to transfer tax, that we didn't know about that until after we passed the budget. It was twice as high as what we had budgeted. We budgeted 3, we came in at 6.1. Can you give us some sort of, because I know those are still like.
That's where the quarterly
Right.
report is gonna come.
And
Right, but I mean, so right now, we're in the middle of budget, we won't get that, so can we get some projections? And I know that we asked,
it's right here too. I
Okay.
mean, this
Oh, I'm
is
sorry.
this is the 31 million that you referred to a couple times.
Right.
This is that unassigned fund balance,
right,
but of that 31 million, about 20 million of that unassigned fund balance is to keep us at our reserve level.
Is that,
this
so,
isn't the 60%.
one question, Clayton, so are we moving from 16.6 up to 20 in the,
In this, no, this is held flat.
or excuse me,
In this,
What's the difference between the reserve balance and the unassigned?
no, the unassigned from the audit, and I dug into it, that 31 million from the unassigned fund balance does include the 16.66.
total fund balance.
It's the total unassigned, that reserve balance is unassigned. So you have that 20 million that's your reserve,
plus some number?
and then it's the 10 million on top of that that's technically excess reserves above and beyond.
Okay, so it was 19.
And out of that 10.7, we, the city council authorized what, almost $5 million, right there.
So it's still a good, it's still a lot,
It's good,
it's still
yeah,
very
yeah.
substantial. I mean, I know it's, when I read different, agency reports like S&P, they referred to the really nice substantial cushion that Evanston has. Also, in speaking with the auditor, he said frequently cities have cushions this big in unassigned money or surplus, even much smaller, they often use it towards an extra pension payment. So, or towards it. So I think like last year, had this been really clear to the whole council, like had the council been educated about above and beyond the 16, okay, to your point, that this is including the 16.6, then we might have considered fully, paying towards a fully funded, pension last year. So I just think we need to really weigh that and consider that, because ultimately it should be council how we decide how we want to spend that. And it might be in our interest, because what we're getting hit with most in terms of ratings is our large pension deficit. When all these rating agencies, they said that's what's harming Evanston the most. So, given where we're gonna be at the end of this year, I think we should decide whether we want to consider, we've heard the public, how much of that we want to allocate towards.
So we'll talk about pensions, I assume, in a little bit, or were you meant to talk
It's on
about
the
that?
next
I would just say on this, it's really,
I mean, if let's keep on the thing until all the questions are answered about the revenue and then move into the second half, yes.
I would say it's really good that we had the $14 million surplus this year, right?
Or more.
But for something that we talked about was that's somewhat a function of our revenues have been more reactive to inflation than costs have been. And I think the bigger issue, and 23 is not really the problem, right? It's that those projections that you did, that I know are sort of top level projections. That's where we really need to dig in more, because it's not 23 that's a problem, but we flip into much more concerning numbers when we get
I mean, you see the expenses are by 4%.
Can we go back to, before we move forward, just one point I want to make on the, license permitted fee revenue for 2023, we penciled in $7.5 million. It's quite possible that's going to be significantly more with the new Northwestern Stadium. Don't want to get too
With
far
the
ahead of
what?
ourselves on
The
that.
permit for the stadium.
The permit
Oh.
for Northwestern Stadium. So, do we put those numbers in? I don't think we should, because it's too uncertain, but something that
And
we.
we asked the council, I think mayor said, no, we don't know, city
Yeah.
manager told city, we don't have it, and again, it is up to city council, if they say, go ahead and put 9 million, yeah, we will have to do that.
Yeah.
Wait till we know it's real.
Right, I'm not suggesting we do
But
something different.
And
let's
hopefully that's gonna be something that will substantially change the trajectory of what you're currently anticipating for 24, 25.
Right.
Absolutely.
But that's another area where we continue to improve is what do these near-term projections really look like? And then we have to make more of the decision about what's the right fund balance. It's not so much now, right? Because we're way above whatever number we would even want to stabilize at. But we, that will become a bigger issue in a couple of years of what's the right fund balance. But it seems like we're not going to have to really lock that in until we're getting closer to, do we want to go below 20% or?
I mean, I think 20% is reasonable, even though, in my chart, it says some of the communities 25, I talked about library,
The library is so de minimis, that's not really
Right,
a
but
good comparison.
I mean, personally, if you ask me, yes, I would say 20% is good number.
But again, I want to say, when all the rating agencies, it's more important that we're paying more towards our pension in terms of, having a considered a fiscally sound, trajectory than it is towards increasing. So I would say if you're figuring out whether it's going to go towards having more money on the table in the reserve versus paying more towards our pension, it absolutely is more in our interest. It's a double good whammy to put money towards pension more than increasing. If, I'd say one or the other. I wouldn't say increase our reserve, but continue at 90% trajectory. Our pension would not be a wise decision.
Just I'm reading the S&P rating, I think the report which we have posted, some of those things which they talk about is this flexibility and the revenues and the fund balance. Strong management policies under the financial management assessment, budgetary performance that has benefited from active managerial oversight of key revenues and expenditures, leading to consistently positive operations. And obviously they mentioned about Northwestern, that, okay, you have that kind of flexibility.
It's a long report, but they also say very weak debt profile, with poorly funded pensions, substantially underfunded pensions. The city does not have significant amount of debt plans during the next few years. A credit weakness is Evanston's largest pension obligation. It goes on and on.
Right.
If pension were fully funded, totally makes sense to ramp up our fund reserve.
Then,
Yeah,
I
then
don't
you have
think
that
that's a goal.
flexibility.
Right, and so
Yeah, absolutely.
really it comes down to the council making a judgment call. How much of this excess money do we want to put into the pensions, and how much, if any, do we want to maybe gently ramp up our
One thing-
Why
reserve?
don't we go to the property?
Right, and we go
Because I
to
think
the
this is
property
the key
tax.
part of that.
Just, I would bring up one thing which I just got an update about the reparations, that the council is going to consider set aside $1 million, take away from general fund and give it to the reparations fund every year. So,
Is that,
council, the committee recommendation which would come to the council.
yeah,
Who's
It-
making
Not
that
approved by the council
recommendation?
yet.
And is this because the second marijuana facility is not yet materialized?
I mean, I just got this, kind of summary of the minutes from the staff that, they have recommended to the city council to transfer $1 million.
Who has recommended?
The committee.
The reparations committee.
So this is coming up through reparations committee
Yes.
to council, to where?
To the council for $1 million out of transfer tax, real estate transfer tax.
Does that come to finance and budget? Does it come to MPW or
No, it should
direct
come
to
to the
council?
council, I think, I think it goes to the council, right? Where it goes straight to council. Right, yeah, reparations to the council.
Okay.
So you would see mostly, I think,
Yeah,
I don't know whether it's.
But if the reason is that the second marijuana facility is yet to
I mean,
materialize.
nothing background, the only thing they mentioned is that, since we have that graduated tax rate.
Yeah.
In real estate, they want to take, that $1 million technically out of that, any property sold above $1.5 million. So which has a higher rate of $7.09. So.
Okay.
Right. The property
That's not
tax
approved yet.
All right.
Okay,
So here
so
it
this is a new schedule, all right, that I did not circulate to everyone here, but just to make the point.
You just send it to council.
So down below is the total amount, there's three components of the general fund, property tax levy. It is, well, the general fund plays in the, let's see, sorry, 29, is this? Total, okay, the 29 was from the other page, right? The 29 is adding up to the
29 's
prior
right
page, right?
At the bottom over here.
Where it shows property tax. What we're running into is if we want to fund more for pensions, we're only starting with the general fund property tax source of $9 million in 2020.
Does the 19 get us to what, like 97?
No, this is the current pension contribution, which is flat with the prior year of 20.1.
And that's at 90%
Which
level?
would theoretically get us to 90, although we've discussed, that number was set at the beginning of the year and it does not reflect the current asset
And
value.
24 would get us,
2040, 90% by 2040. So
no,
we-
but if we did 24 million to the pension. that would-
24 puts up 4 million on the pension contribution, puts us closer
I mean,
to
one
100%.
One suggestion I heard from, I don't know whether Luke, it was, I think that if we ramp it over the 3-year period, so I reached out to the actuary, so he said you will have to give extra $1.5 million this year, about this extra $3 million next year, and extra $4.5 million in the third year. Over and above this
Right,
actuary.
right.
To get to 100% over a 3-year period.
Well,
4.5.
get to 100% path, you're not
Right.
at 100%.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
4.5 this year if we want to be on that path now. So,
Yeah, it's a 1 year, but then I think I
Yeah,
will
no.
have to kind of reach out to the actuary and say, find out if we do it, not in 1 year, but over 3 years, and I'm like, how does that work?
I mean, I think. it's
And he
well.
said 1.5 extra this year, 3 million extra next year, and 4.5 million extra in the third year.
That
This
was
was
the actuary.
Jason?
That was the actuary. So I think there's 2 points. One, what path do we want to be on? But also, I want to point out that if we are committed, so this is the total property tax levy here, right? 55 cents.
Right.
The issue is, we're already eating up what's available to the general fund. It's already dropped from 11.8 to 9. So if we want to fund more into the pensions, we can't just take it from the general fund. The general fund is already down to 9. So I think,
And why is it going from 57 to 55? Why did the 11 million go to 9?
This was our original
Forty-
proposal.
That was the
Okay.
original proposal, I took it out, so it's totally flat. So it's, the property taxes will be
11
flat
million
to
goes-
21 to 22 to 23. I mean, the general fund, I don't know why it was 7.8, so it's a slightly more amount, I don't know.
Which one?
In 21. It was 7.8 in 21 to the general fund, and now we have 9.
Right, so it differs, like it has a 2 components, corporate levy and the IMRF pension. And that's the total, yeah, what you see in general fund.
So the point is, if we want to stay on, adjust for the fact, the 90% path, I would say we're off it right now because of the asset value. And I think that's about $2 million for next year. I don't know.
That's gotta be.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why Jason hasn't responded to so
But
many emails.
so if we were to use current asset values roughly, it's probably $2 million more.
Yeah.
Than we have in the budget currently, to stay on the 90% path and not be flat the prior year. If we want to get to 100% by 2040, is about $4.5 million higher. I think the point is there's not a path to do that if we are not willing, well, it's going to put pressure on the property taxes available for the general fund. Because right now, the general fund is also subsidizing the library,
Oh, yeah.
right? So the library is levying more, but we, in effect, to keep everything flat, took that out of the general.
I mean, even solid waste fund is an enterprise fund, so it should be fully funded by user fees. But we have been subsidizing that too by transferring property tax money out of our total tax levy and giving it to the solid waste fund.
So whatever we want to do on pensions, I don't think it's sustainable if we're not willing to actually let the police and fire levy drive an overall increase in the property taxes. There's only $9 million available in the general.
Correct.
But I still think that we look at surplus. I don't understand why we're so hesitant, because we have had, and it's been commented on by auditors and others, that we have a robust, frequently cushion above and beyond the reserve. I don't understand why, when other cities do that, when they have a surplus, they put it towards pension. Why can't we?
But our current projections are that we're going to use significant amounts of the surplus just
But that's
with
fine, but
flat.
I'm sorry, you have to be clear, like, you can't say that, Hitesh, unless it's in the budget. If you're using surplus, then I want to see surplus. You can't just say we're going to use it and have unassigned monies. You can't.
No, I don't say use it, as requested by the chair here, that, okay, give us the projections over the next 3-4 years. We showed that if the expense continue to stay 4%, and we are working right now with one of the unions, they want more than 4% increase. So my 4% increase even kind of under
Then
the.
it's assigned money, it's not unassigned. So I
Right,
just want to be clear.
and that's just
And
the
it's in the
projected
budget.
balance.
But
It's not-
then it should say, like, this will be paid for with this, and that's how it has to be represented in any proposed budget that you want to council vote on. You can't not have that in there, and then we end up, like we did last year, with a lot of money, one of our biggest cushions ever, and council is completely unaware of that. And in fact, we could have put more money towards our pension last year. So I just think it's really.
Councilmember Kelly, I can't just like ideally as a CFO, just talk about this year and say, okay, we'll worry about what happens next year. If the recession comes to that, we lost $5 million like we lost in COVID era, and then I would have like struggling because now we have given $5 million to CIP for the project, we've given $5 million to the pension fund, now we are, okay, how would we balance the general fund budget? And the contractual increases are there, the expenses would go up no matter what we do. So, and we have faced that situation in Evanston before many times. So, and again, at the end of the day, it is the city council who makes the decision. Yes, I will have to implement that.
Right.
But if you ask me my opinion, this is what, yes, we put the facts and we kind of tell
And I'm
you.
not objecting to raising, but I think we have to look at both. I don't think it's about, like, I'm about full, I think 4.5, and if it means raising 2 and taking 2 from surplus, then maybe that's what we do. I mean, or at least we can all agree on something, but we need to do better than we're doing. So, but I don't think it has to be fully, however we improve it, needs to be fully on the backs of the residents. I think Evanston has had in the past couple of years, we've, kept really robust.
So I think we need better projections. We need to continue to work on our projections to understand how much excess reserve do we really have, right? And we'll continue to, try to, 24, 25, 26, are we really looking at, it's on another slide, it's not on this. Are we really looking at these deficits going to 11, right? Because that's the number. Going from the new 3.2 to 5.4 to 8.6 to 11? Or is it going to be somewhat better than that, right? If we can moderate it at 3, then I would agree. There's probably more room in the current excess reserves to have some degree of additional contribution, but not. Look, it has to be sustainable, right? And where's the money going to come from to make sure that we stay on the 90 or 100%?
Right, but I just want to say, so for example, when there was, we had been a budget, you all recall, for $11.5 million, and to Councilmember Harris's point last night, she made a big point, and I've heard this from management too, there aren't real guardrails in place. In principle, you would think that budget was the guardrail. So I think we also, I know, you know, this feels like a separate conversation, but I think it does have an impact. So I think the funding at whatever, you know, hopefully at 100, going towards 100%, that should be worked into our annual budget. That means we do have to set parameters that are expected to be, you know, followed. And I think I've heard this from management, like, we don't really have guardrails, no one's really telling us. So I don't blame staff for coming in with, you know, big expenditures. So now I'm glad that, Hitesh mentioned that Laura looks like maybe hopefully cutting back the potential bonding next year from 24 to 9. You missed Luke earlier.
I mean, again, Councilor Kelly, sorry to interrupt you. 10 million is the city council effort, but if city council said no, go ahead and include that $5 million of parts too, then
Sure.
9 million would go to 14. She just assumed that, okay, these are my top priority considering the safety concerns and grant funding and all that.
It's already been approved.
But which would exclude all other projects, like any parts and whatnot. So, but city council directs otherwise, no, we want these 3 projects to be going forward, then the amount would go up. So it is ultimately the city council who would dare decide. And I just kind of to correlate that I'm not against the 90% or 100% funding. I was just reading the news today from Schaumburg mayor that he said, okay, why we need 100% funding? Everybody's not going to retire at the same time and start drawing the pension on
As their response.
No, but
So
So you don't end up with exponential.
Right.
Can I just ask, what, the debt service fund, can you explain that to me?
the debt service fund is the levy that, like, when we issue the bond for capital projects, and we levy for that.
Right,
So obviously, based on the amortization schedule we get, what happens is when we issue the bond, we get the bond order and we submit it to the Cook County. And so Cook County, based on all of our bond orders for every bond issue we did, they prepare the tax levy for us. Now, what we do is, some of the bonds are paid for like a water fund, sewer fund, tip fund, so we submit the abatement, so the tax levy goes down. So in general, I would give you, like, suppose our total debt service would be around, with principal and interest, average again, anywhere from 15, 17, 18 million. But we only levy around 10, 11, because the others are what we call abated and paid for by other funds like parking, water, sewer, tip funds.
so our debt service principal and interest is between 15 and 18 million?
Yes,
And I think
but it's not necessarily a tax levy, because some of the
So you
other.
get parking, you get all
Right,
that.
yeah.
And then who balances that, do we balance that out quarterly to make sure that you guys balance
Not
that
quarterly,
out?
because what happens is, like, we pay twice a year, like our debt service. The June is the interest payment, the December 1st is the interest and principal, and we get the bill from our paying agent, as well as I met with the Cook County that are record.
And what if we have an excess with that, do we pay down more principal, or?
No, we cannot unless we can, there's no excess, because if I have like $14 million debt 17 year, I only ask for 14 million levy.
But you don't know what you're getting from the others, the parking and all that.
No, I know that. Because when we issue the bond and say parking fund, say, okay, I want 2 million out of that, we have prorated the debt service to the parking fund. So I have the numbers all the way up to the next 20 years for each fund, that what they are paying.
Also, funds like water and sewer, the revenue side is a little more predictable and stable than in the general fund where it's account-based. You know how much water you're selling. and
Right.
paying.
But this debt service does not include the enterprise funds.
Right.
Right, it's just the GO.
Just the GEO bond.
Geobonds, yes.
which was reduced significantly this year. I
Right.
think that's something, a big deal.
And again, it's, yeah, I mean, it's a
First time in
good
a very
thing
long
that,
time, we actually.
No, congratulations.
I mean, the total debt went from like 225 down to 213, which is significant. We haven't seen that in many, many, many years, and the levy was filed. So I mean, hats off to everybody. You know, I mean, this is a remarkable
Good
year.
for
So
you,
now
Lou.
we can keep on that path by, you know, increasing our payments to our pension and continue to decrease that bond, because it's also that bond debt that hurts the city. And keeps our ratings at AA, but AAA, like a lot of our surroundings.
So when do we have to decide the pension payment? Is that something that's approved by council?
yes, that's part of the tax levy, yes.
Yeah.
Because this has to be levied by the Cook County, so we have to submit the ordinances to the Cook County in December.
So what's the next turn of the dial? I just, procedurally, would you then, does Laura Biggs come back and just say, you know, this is what we're willing to cut, and then go to council members and
No,
say?
so again, it comes down to the Monday night, when
Right.
Lara says that, okay,
So she'll say, there's the 5 you've already approved, and then here's my wish list for 14 million, or $9 million.
Whatever, I mean, I think
$9
she
million.
did quite a bit good presentation on Monday night, with where the projects are related to the grants, the projects which are kind of needed. And then she said, this is how 24 million, but if you want, I can exclude that.
And so then you're talking about a $14 million bond.
No, 9 million even, I think. I'll have to check.
I
See
thought
the
it was 9 plus
presentation.
the 5.5 that was already approved, Clayton.
The 5.5 from the 2022 amount.
Got it, okay, understood.
And that'll.
Can I ask a clarifying question about the levy, the pension levy? So if we submitted these numbers and said our total pension levy was 20, whatever. Is that it? We can't, at some point, put any other revenue into the pension fund?
We
We
can,
can, yeah, but that's what
you
we're
can
talking
always
about.
contribute more.
Okay,
So
You just can't levy more.
And you know what, I think that,
Levy more in
we
property
can't
tax.
levy more.
right,
But when is that final
But
decision made?
if we levy that much for pensions, we have to put in at least that much
correct,
into the pension.
correct. So we have, and maybe Luke, you want to address it, but next week will be introduction of the budget, right? And then is it 2 weeks later or 1 week?
So, yeah, our budget schedule is always targeted, at the earliest, November 21st, would be the first possible date that we would adopt the budget. It could be later than that, but November 21st would be the earliest.
So I would almost say, just because this is so important, I think that we do kind of set a precedent in some positive direction on this, that if we have to, because we're working it out here, a recommendation regarding pension, I mean, unless we can do it tonight. I mean, if we can make a recommendation on this, then great, but if we can't, I would say, you know, that we shouldn't rush it.
I think where you're heading, Claire, is that, you're suggesting that this committee perhaps make a recommendation to fund more than the minimum, towards pensions.
And we're already well above the minimum,
So
actually.
Right, well, to
An
fund,
incremental amount, to go above the 90.
To go
And
above
I think
the-
we need a number from Jason. We need, given the 930 asset values, what,
I mean, he hasn't been responding,
okay,
so I'll have to reach out to the pension.
we pay him, so hopefully he will, right? So, given the 930 asset values, as opposed to 20 million, what keeps us on the path to 90% funded by 2040? I think it's around 22. Okay, but that's up to him. That's up.
And what
the 90
about the years
But, and
that were
also,
up
what,
though?
given the 930 asset values, what gets us to 100? I think it's around 4.5.
It is.
Right?
Exactly.
And so those are our choices, 20, 22, 4.5, right? And are we then, depending upon which path we take, does council, not our call, right? Is there no possibility to increase the levy and not just take it out of the general fund for 2 million or 4.5? I mean, again, it goes to sustainability, right? And so maybe we could say we have the excess reserves to go to an adjusted 90 or 100 this year. But again, I don't think that's sustainable longer term if we're not willing to at least raise the overall property tax levy by the
That's-
police and fire requirement.
But that's gonna
Let
be
that levy
like
go
20% raise.
No. So it would
If
be
you
like.
go from 4 million, if you were gonna do
No, we
20
wouldn't do
million.
that, like if we took 2 from our surplus.
But where are we gonna get it? Sounds like
2.5.
we're already,
No, and we raised we raised the property taxes by 2, basically put back by 2, and I think it's
4.5.
important that, you know, like, again, that the residents understand, like, that, it's not 1 for 1, like, that's a better deal to actually raise your taxes by that than set us back that much more, again, in terms of our pension obligation. I mean, that's, you know, money well spent for our
pay a
residents.
little bit more now or a lot more later.
Right, exactly.
but is
And
there
then-
a way to get 2 million from the general fund?
Yeah,
So
I think
that would come from the
There-
excess reserve.
correct,
Right.
Not-
Excess
and
reserves
above
or
and
additional
beyond.
cuts, right?
Okay,
right, or
Gotta-
more cuts, right.
So we need 2.5 or we need 4, right? And
Right,
so
yeah.
what's the right mix and when do we have to decide between, are there additional cuts? Is there some degree of property tax increase that would be acceptable? To levy more and
I almost
actually not
feel
just
that
take
we
that out
have
of the general
to
fund?
cap the levy at 2 million, probably. And then see where we can come up with another million or
Or
2
another 2.5.
from, I mean, I just think that would be too big of a, if we did 4
I
million.
agree. I'd say 2, you know, bring it back up 2, and then see if we can't find the other 2.5, we either ideally through excess, and maybe there's some areas, within the budget. I think that would be remarkable.
And so just rough numbers, if I'm recalling the calculation for the impact on the average household, if we raise the levy, or if we put $2 million back into this levy, that would be like $30 a house.
Like,
$64 on a $300,000 home, so,
That was for this.
yeah. So if you put $2 million back
But
in,
$2 million, we're going back to.
you're gonna be right back where we were, so we'll be right about 64 on a 300,000, 120 on a 600,000,
how much, 120 and 600?
100.
And this is again, just
So I
a
think-
teeny portion of tax.
This is a big decision, and we probably need to put a couple of pages together for people to understand.
Yeah.
Right? What's built into budget now? Flat, 20. But the assets are down, we really think 90% is 22. It's about 24 and a half if you want to get a 100% pass. And what is the plan on how that would get funded?
But
Either
when the
excess
assets were
reserves or
up
some
last
other-
year and we gave 20 million,
Yeah.
shouldn't that have
Yeah.
made the path a little
So
better?
here's how it works, and I mean, again,
Well-
I think I have talked to Chair Livingston a few times, how the actual report works. That when they prepare the report and give it to us sometime in July, August, for the levy in November, they take the numbers as of January 1st of this year.
That was recalculated.
Obviously, the market was good. Now, again, the reports are based on the 5-year, what we call a smoothing.
Right,
So the
right.
1
So
year
it
doesn't
takes-
affect, right?
Right, so this 1 year isn't gonna bring it down as much as you think, because we've got the other years to
So we
smooth it.
want him to tell us, what are those,
Yeah.
what are the three numbers?
Right.
If you want to, I would say, forget the smoothing. What, we know the 930 asset balance, right? So if we want to take a conservative view, what's the 930 asset balance, and we still want to hit 90% by 2040, or 100% by 2040?
I mean, we should
How much
be
of an
going towards
adjustment is there?
100%.
Yeah. So what are those three, and how do we want to fund it?
And then
And
there's
is there an
the
acceptable mix
1.25%.
that part of that is a real property tax increase, and part of it is the use of excess reserves? I just, long term, I think there's no, it doesn't seem viable to not agree that, to not accept that at some level, there will be a property tax increase. Because there's only $9 million that's available to the general.
When you say use
fund
excess
today.
reserves, are those earmarked for other things?
No, it's this.
Right.
It's, you know, it's that we're starting
That,
at the end of
Right, right.
22 at 45,
It comes from-
depending
Right,
on what target.
But I'm
Coming in
kind of
under
with you,
budget
why are we
prior.
holding on?
I know.
Because we're projecting big deficits.
Yeah, but we can't, but, I mean, that's why we make a budget, and I just, we have our 16.6, we're talking about anything above and beyond that. And then we, you know, use our line of credit, even though I realize that would be high, but I think we also have to have for council, John, help me out, like, you know, what we would take potentially from excess and what we would recommend increasing the levy, and be ready to maybe, if everyone's like, oh, no, like, Daniel really doesn't want to increase the levy, then we settle at, you know, just to be prepared to negotiate, and so that, but at least we will have improved.
And it doesn't have to be, you know, a stark, oh, are you doing 90 or 100, right? There's room.
Right, there's
Anything
room.
above 20 will
Right,
improve our long-term
Exactly.
position. I would say you want to at least be at 22 to not actually be, not recognizing the market's down.
And if we don't
Right,
have a
still get
deficit
93.
next year, can we take another million from the
Right.
reserve and put in the, so we kind of like, maybe we get to 96.
Right.
Or 97, and then we just kind of use,
Maybe we take the Northwestern Stadium revenue and make a one-time lump
Right.
sum.
Right.
Really.
And longer term, when we get organized around it, there have got to be some asset disposals that we can also think about. Where do those proceeds go?
I mean,
Right, and we don't know what those are. This is-
That was the discussion, I think, when I came back in 18 or 19, I don't know exactly whether it was formally discussed at the council, but at that time, there was some conversation about that, oh, we will get rid of these assets, city assets,
Yeah.
and give the entire proceeds to the pension.
Yeah, no, I mean, what I've seen though, just from talking again with,
Jason?
not Jason, our audit,
Oh,
our guy who does our audit, that, you know, frequently when cities do end up at the end of the year with the excesses, they're just making those payments towards their pension, because even if you know, there's a little risk, you do have your reserve fund still. So the chances, and talking to him also, are to other people, like, that's plenty to absorb any shocks next year. So anything above and beyond that, I see absolutely no reason we wouldn't put that fully towards the pension payment.
in the presentation, we saw like every dollar we put in reduces future dollars we'll have to put in. So,
But probably 3, yeah.
yeah, so we
Yeah,
could
it's the
even
best
put in
investment we
some of
can
the
make.
excess,
Yeah.
and then,
I mean, I would
We
put
can
just
go-
some context on that, okay, your proposal used. The other question would come up depending on the city council decision on CIP, because we have already, city council has approved to transfer some of the money to CIP fund, to fund maintenance. Now, if city council say, yep, use the couple of millions for the CIP project, reduce the bond funding, because that's important too. So, yes, we have to kind of consider the overall picture that.
well,
yes,
that's
how much
why
money
I'm
we are
saying,
taking.
what other plans do you have besides the pension for that excess? So I don't wanna make that decision in a vacuum, I wanna
But
know
you
what,
can't, I mean, you can't. It has to be in the budget. And I get a little bit, I mean, the 16.6 is in there, we know that that is unassigned and it's assigned to unassigned money. But anything beyond that, it's really like surplus. And it has to be used according to the council's interest.
Sure.
And that's where that has not been happening in the past.
I mean, if we were sitting here and we said, hey, we think we're gonna be at we're not gonna be using excess reserves in 24, 25, and 26, and we're sitting on 40 million, 45 million now of an ending, or 25 million of excess fund balance, then it would be a much easier decision to say, let's put 12.5 in the police and 12.5 in the fire.
Right.
And try to, shore those up even more. But it's just going to, how do we get more comfortable with what the next 3 years are gonna be? Because on this other slide, they're sort of concerningly negative.
but we can always add more of the excess in 24 and 25 to the pension.
Correct. So I think we get better annual projections, updates during the year on where are we headed in the current year. Better methodology to get to what are our near-term projections, 23, 24, 25. We'll get a better view on how much excess reserve do we really have. Right, so.
Absolutely.
And I think you get a lot of clarification once all these union contracts are signed too.
Yeah, and that's the big unknown.
That's the big ball in the air. The
Right.
numbers are big.
Right.
Salaries and wages are 75% of our general
Right,
collaboration. So if they come in, and some of the numbers that they're saying, these
When is
numbers are
that
probably
completed
real.
by?
They're probably what?
These
when-
numbers are probably close to accurate for
Yeah.
future years.
When are the contracts supposed to
I
be?
mean, there is individual contract like AFSCME, fire, police, and I think
They're
the
on different tracks. They all expire.
CMO and the HR and our legal department, they are working, but yeah, I mean, it would be a kind of separate timeline, separate issues with each union.
Okay, so.
So, and I think it is about, like, if we were to recommend, and I'm not sure how this will go in terms of us making recommendations next Monday, but if we were to recommend, say, increasing the levy by 2 million, I think, we really do have to also give, and you could do it to, or somebody could give that education to, for the public, to understand that, actually, like, had we been doing this a long time ago, this year, our payment would be 7 million instead of 21 million. Actually, like, to your point, David, 3 to 1, it really would be, like, we would be, $14 million
It'd be
more.
substantially less, right?
But I also think it's more important to show the future, that if we don't do
Right.
this today,
Right.
then your future,
Right,
because
but
people are gonna be,
But I'm
That's
to
the
say
past,
that we will
right.
be, in 10 years from now, we'll be in a much, and most of us are here, believe in Evanston and Evanston's future. We're not just passing through, so we want to see it.
Yeah, no, I think there's a way to kind of brand this.
And
Right.
Pretty
somebody's
easily
gonna take
and
more
look good.
long-term work than,
Yeah.
Jason can do in a week, and hopefully we'll be responsive. But we know generally, it's kind of 20, 22, 24 and a half. Those are, everything above the 20 is sort of.
I mean, sometimes I like actual science is, I think, even tougher than the rocket science, so, I mean, how they come up with the numbers, so.
Right, then there's a 6.25 versus
And
6.5.
so, and I guess when do we need to make a recommendation, what we would do, or do we need to make a recommendation,
I think that when is tonight, right? That, because we're not gonna meet again before the budget will be passed. And the budget goes to council for introduction on Monday next week. Right, so
yeah.
tonight would be the appropriate time to make a formal recommendation. I think that should come in the form of a vote, which then becomes a formal recommendation.
Okay. So do we have to suspend I think we've discussed that, but then we would suspend the rules, I think, to take a vote.
I don't know, there's no rule.
That, I mean, I don't know, because I don't.
so
have
we're
the
making a
item.
recommendation for council to vote.
To vote on, we're gonna tell them what we think would be,
That would,
how to proceed.
I think that's what I, like, the Finance and Budget Committee officially recommends that whatever we want to recommend,
can
and we
we,
vote on
But we
that.
don't have all the exact numbers.
And we don't,
Well, we
we're
do,
not
but
gonna
I-
have the
We'll
numbers.
assume it's between
Yeah.
20 and 24.
Like a contribution of at least, or, meeting this, you know,
I mean, should we meet, should we just meet on that issue and vote on that one point later? We had to draft what the recommendation would be, and I'd probably.
And I don't know whether, since it's not an agenda item and we don't have any.
Not an agenda item, so we
yet,
do
I
that.
don't know whether we can do the recommendation.
So we probably need
you
some
can
advice
suspend the
and maybe,
rules, but we can suspend the rules.
I don't think there's a rule for us.
I mean, I kind of like what I
Prevented
said
us from
before, you know, that the levy not to exceed 2 million, and that, we get updated numbers from the pension consultants, and we find ways through excess of the general fund.
To match what we're, I would say, whatever we're talking about increasing.
Right.
That we match that in accessing the surplus. So if we, 2 and 2.
Right, but it may only be 3 this year. It may not be,
Right.
you know,
Yeah, if we can do it all through excess better, then we keep Janice's happy.
but I would like to cap the amount of
I agree.
the levy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
so as a recommendation, we would like to, again, I think we're kind of rushing things to actually make recommendations.
And I would highly
Can we
recommend
have a
that you
phone call?
combine both the things, because
Yeah, right.
particularly when I said both things means, one is the pension, giving money to pension out of general fund, and for the bond issues, towards the bond issue, reducing the bond side. So it would make more sense, because if you recommend something, say, yeah, give 2 million, 3 million, then at the city council, the decision about the CIP, for say, yeah, give 3 or 4, 5. So overall, what do you think as a finance budget committee, that we should take away this money out of the operating fund and use it towards the long-term solution, which includes the pension issue and the CIP issue, the bonding? So, I mean, again, this is a suggestion from me. It is your decision, but I would highly recommend that you put the entire picture in the perspective. Yeah.
So, you mean,
Seems like any increase here needs to be an increase in the property tax levy. If we want to go to 22.5 or 24. But I don't want to force this and make a bad recommendation, right? So could we think about what that is?
Do you want the figures first from Jason, or what? or
Yeah,
what-
Yeah, I
what
think
is-
we need the figures.
You know, I'm asking 3
Post
times, I'm
another meeting,
surprised,
just
I've
a quick
copied you,
meeting.
right, couple of times.
But we're not gonna get that answer in time to inform.
My question is there a way to have sort of a draft of the recommendation and then we vote by email, or is that not, we can't do that?
can't do that, but we don't have to have our final vote on the 21st either, right? I mean, we could, if we're waiting, like, if we wanted to schedule
Well,
another meeting.
I mean, it's also informative that the consensus of this committee seems to be what we're talking about. Councilmember Kelly and I are on the council. I don't know if Bobby and Devon are on the call, and Melissa.
Let's see if they ask them.
Right.
Can we just give a guideline instead of a
I'm here.
post? We say,
Okay,
that
so let's see what.
based on our discussion, you know, these are the 3 points. We'd like A, to not have a levy more than 2 million. B, we'd like to see how much we can use from the excess reserve, and C, how much can we use from the general fund. And this is kind of these are the guidelines that we'd like the city council to consider when voting. Then we're not making an actual recommendation.
Right, and I would say we'd like to lean on.
Right, so Melissa,
What?
or anyone on the phone have any points here? Any thoughts?
Councilmember Bean, do you have any thoughts?
Oh,
Councilmember Bean?
I'll tell you, it's a little hard to follow the discussion because everyone is so enthusiastic about, and, but I think, was that Sherry who just, offered up those 3 points? I like those because they summarize what as best I can tell, the conversation has been. And it's it's sending the sentiment of the Finance and Budget Committee to the council without necessarily nailing down a specific recommendation.
Yeah. So maybe we can think about what it is, right? And you could take it to council. It doesn't have to be a formal recommendation, but our consensus is, this is what we should do.
So there's the pension, and then there's about bonding for 20, your point about.
Sherry, can you repeat what you said?
To the levy not to exceed 2 million.
Okay, so 1 second.
Well, first, we want to get updated projections, but once we have those, the levy does not exceed more than 2 million,
By which you mean 2 million
above and
above
beyond,
the latest,
yes,
the latest number.
yes, which you said would be $64
For
for 300.
Yeah.
And that
If we have.
we,
Just
the
clarify.
council considers other sources from the general fund.
Or for the
From the
excess reserves.
Well, three things, just two things, the
No, only the
surplus.
unassigned. We're not, it wouldn't come from any place else except from the unassigned.
I thought you're also gonna look at the general fund to see if we can squeeze something out, no,
It would come from excess reserves.
excess reserve, okay.
Beyond their, right.
It's the same thing.
Well,
It's the same
consider
thing. It's the
excess
same thing.
reserve,
It's the general fund.
Take it from this year,
Right.
last
Right, but
year,
it's above
consider
the
the cumulative balance.
16.6, just to be clear.
Right, that's the excess part.
while balancing the CPI, because that decision can't be made without balancing the, what you were calling it,
Yeah,
I mean, the CIP project.
CIP.
Fund,
It's
yeah.
separate.
it's separate?
Yeah.
I mean, I would consider in totality, but it's up to the committee to,
Let's
yeah.
consider them one by one.
Okay,
Right, so we want to take up to $2 million, bump this number back up to 57.
57.
Right.
Are we,
Right.
And then look for how much more out of reserves?
the excess reserve.
Well, what's the target? What are we shooting for?
6%.
I mean, we'd like to find another 2 million in there, but I don't know if,
So up to another $2 million.
well, we want to get the new projection, but,
it would be nice if we got to the 4.5, but I would say, if there's a big debate, like between the public and council, about raising the levy and not wanting to raise it, then, you know, if we end up just increasing our contribution by 2 million from the excess, we've still made progress. I just want
Yeah.
everyone to, you know.
Yeah.
I'm about raising it, because I would like to see us funding more, but I just wanted to.
well, we just, by saying maximum, we say it won't go any more. It could be
Right, but they
500,000.
could also, right, so I just want to say that,
Right.
that's one option, is to increase, you know, the levy, and then also take from the surplus. Okay.
But I'm still confused on that, because we have this surplus, and I just feel whenever you have a surplus, everyone wants a piece of it. So is there a list of things that you want to use? How much do you want to keep as a surplus? What are the other things you
So
want to
our
use?
projections go on, when we propose the budget this year, we say, considering that, okay, a couple of events which happen and looking at some of the other overall environment, that yes, in COVID, we lost around 6 to 7
Right.
million in revenue. And considering the city council goals of stabilizing the long-term city finances, we thought that, okay, and we looked at some of the other communities of our size and neighboring communities, that, okay, what is their fund balance policy? So we were on the low end at 16.66%. Others were 20, 25, 30, 40. Again, yes, I mean, I think even one of the council members asked me what is the reasonable number, and I said 20% is a good number. We don't have to be at 40% and 30%.
But they also didn't have the quite the depth we have. Some of those cities don't have the nearly half a billion almost.
I mean, so I'm just giving the whole context here,
And
that how
that's
we came up. So we suggested, and even then we suggested, okay, let's go to 20%. Then while we were talking to Manager Stowe and Deputy Manager, and they said, it could be even too burdensome in doing from 16.6 to 20%, because it's like 3.3%, which is around $4 million. So why don't we do it over the period of 3 years? We go to 18% next year, then we go to 19, and then we go to 20%. Yes, goal is good, 20%, but let's do it over 3 years. So to be spread out the burden, and that's how we came out, that, okay, we will use that. Then I reached out to the city council while I was doing the financial presentation of for 21, that looks like we ended the 21 based on the audited numbers, because sometimes we have a big adjustment after the year, expenses, receivables, payables. So I said, we have this much fund balance. If we consider 16.6 fund balance required, this is the excess. Now, these are
And
the
the excess is how much?
excess was, can you bring up that the thing?
And last year was 31.
Right here.
Okay,
So I said, look at this. Now, then we suggested some of the things based on the need.
Excess is 12
And the excess is 12. The
Yeah.
excess is 12. And
Yeah,
now it's
okay.
23. The excess right now is 23.
And if you see this thing, Sherry, that some of the items, which were like recommended by the staff and approved by the city council, that this is the good use of the excess reserve.
What is this total? 4 million?
4.8.
So we still have another 7 million.
But we're proposing to use a portion of that to balance this
To
year's
balance
budget.
this year, like 3.5 million to balance. the
Okay, so
23.
then we still have
Around 3
another
million, yeah.
3 million.
Yeah.
So we could put 2 million in
Yeah.
pension.
Right, but why I did put it in the context that at the same time, I think city council sees that, okay, it's not a right time to issue the bond or issue a higher bond, both things, so.
So we're saying, but we also are talking about like belt tightening with regard to, and, you know, also if we are, you know, having one bond roll off and one roll on and it's under 10, if we're really keeping it under 10, then we're okay.
I mean, if we want to reduce the bond size, I mean, like, suppose even if you say, okay, you issue only an approved city council, say, $5 million bond.
That'd be great.
How would we fund it? No,
Right.
I agree. But how would we, second question would be, how would we fund that even
Around,
5 million?
yeah, right.
Is it coming from where? Are we issuing the bonds?
The fire
When?
truck's already been approved. The fire
So-
truck's been approved, right?
But
That 5.5 has
Yeah.
already been approved,
Okay. Oh, that is, okay.
right? It's the other, 9 or that Laura Biggs
Right.
presented, and that's for council to decide if they wanna.
No, council hasn't approved anything.
No, I thought they would approve the 5.5.
No. For 23, they haven't approved anything. They
I
were
was
just
like-
presented the
Okay.
scenario that this
Got
is
it.
the level A, which is most critical, level B, C, like that. And then I think we thought, okay, we would discuss more on 14.
Okay.
So if we didn't use that, let's say we have a net 3 million excess, we didn't use it for the pension, what else would you use it for?
I mean,
well,
we,
whatever they want, for a big change order.
Yeah, we could use that for CIP.
Yeah,
Consulting
yeah.
fees, all kinds of things that we didn't
And what's
approve
the
of.
advantages of using it for CIP versus the pension?
reducing the bond.
Right, but what's gonna cost us more in the long run?
Pension.
The pension?
However, you see these things, in the debt service, it's a tax levy right away. And particularly in this environment, issuing the bonds or issuing the less bonds is kind of a big savings considering the almost 5%.
Yeah, because we're probably looking at another rate hike at least in January, we
Yeah.
know probably
So
another
maybe
one.
we do 1/3 for the debt and 2/3 for the pension.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
That seems like a,
That's good algebra.
yeah.
Should we ask, Hitesh to come up with what he would recommend, given our goals here, and then?
I think we
If
write
it
our
is a
recommendation. I think, because I think
I
that, we give
just find-
staff direction.
Okay, well, he's closest to the numbers, though. I think what based on what you would do, then what would we get comfortable?
I mean, any use that, I just
And how do
wanted
we
to be concrete,
distribute
but I'm
that?
fine, yes, like what
I'm
you
less
said.
certain on when you start
2/3
talking
and
about
1/3.
the bond piece.
Yeah.
Look, I have more of an understanding of where we want to go on the pension side, but
Right.
bringing in the bond side is sort of, I don't know if I'm confident.
No, so this is how I'll
What
say,
specific
why it is
talking about?
contingent, and I cannot say with the specificity. The first thing is council hasn't approved 23 CIP draft. So first thing is,
That's
it
what I-
depends on the amount that.
Right, we need to know how much we need to bond for the CIP.
Right.
I'm
We
curious-
can't answer the bonding question until that is approved.
I'm
Right.
curious, Hitesh, have you talked to them at all about rates, your bond specialist?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's, I
Do
think,
you have any
4 or
notions?
5.
the like, 2 weeks back, they ran the numbers and it came out at the interest rate of around 4.5.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
But we know we're gonna have another rate hike in
Yeah.
January.
January and
probably
March, 50
Maybe
basis
one more
points.
smaller one after that.
I mean, I'm losing there, I'm making like investing at 5% in
If the long bonds aren't going as,
Oh, yeah.
No,
high as
the
the-
yield curve's really flat. you
right,
know.
so we're doing long bonds, right?
Yeah, 20 years.
Yeah, so I think the rate hikes are more on the short end.
20-year,
Short
but part of it gets paid back
Yeah.
every year.
Right,
It's
right,
not
right.
20 at the end.
But,
It's
but anyway.
You might see the more or less the same number, even if I go out.
I mean, our goals, we wanna fund the pension as much as we can. We wanna be fiscally responsible of reducing the debt.
Reducing that. I mean, that's it, and I think we should actually at some point, but I think you're right, those are, set a goal, if we want our debt reduced by 25% over the next 8 years.
And
want
we
our-
might as well figure out what our excess is once we figure out these capital projects, everything. And tell
But I
us,
like your number, whatever they propose, that, okay, give to 2 million to pension and $1 million.
well,
to
2/3,
CIP.
1/3, but does that make, I just threw that out.
Yeah,
I don't
does
know
that
if
make-
that makes
I
sense.
mean, does that, are we
No, no,
getting
it
the most
does
bang
help
for our
little
buck?
bit, yeah,
that
it
way?
doesn't help the whole thing, but we will wait
Do the
until the
calculation.
council finalize that plan.
Right, we need the capital plan before we know what we should recommend on bonds.
Absolutely.
Right.
So I think there's gotta be time after next week's meeting to decide, in light of this, here's what we recommend for bonding.
But nevertheless, we
So-
are giving direction to keep bonding as low as possible next year. I mean, that's definitely a direction we're giving, right?
Right.
Really belt-tightening with regard to any potential bonding.
And reducing the debt a little.
Right, so it should be whatever, you know, coming.
So let's go back, and I think we're about out of time here, but we don't have any other subjects, right?
Is there any possibility that there's projects that can be postponed until
I will.
2024?
It might be a
I
while.
think that's part of that.
That's part of the
That's part of
CIP
the
discussion.
That's part of the CIP.
That's exactly what that means.
So, all right, I think we're down to, the council members are gonna have to take a recommendation of that. One, we think we want to contribute at least $2 million more than what's in the budget for the pension, and we think that should be through, a property, you know, increasing the levy.
Well, first,
Let's
Or excess, and if we go to 24.5, that should come through excess, or maybe you discuss which is first. You know, it's first 2 million through excess, the next 2.5, if we want to go through 100% path through, letting the levy actually increase. That's probably would be more acceptable. First 2 million is excess reserves. Next 2.5, if we want to do up to 100% funding, would be through actually letting the levy increase by that amount. I think that's sort of our
But
recommendation.
I don't know if this is possible, but
Let
if
me-
we did, oh, I'm sorry.
I would just read back what I think the chair just said. It's the desire of this committee to increase the pension contribution by $4.5 million. It's our suggestion that the first $2.5 million come from excess reserves, and then the additional $2 million from an increase in the levy.
I like that, except I would like to see if we reduced the debt by $1 million and we gave the pension $1 million, like what's the 3-year and 5-year cost reduction of that?
reducing the debt, it's about, you mean in lieu of bonding out an extra $1 million?
Right.
So to know what we're going to do on bonding, we need the CIP plan
Right.
finalized.
So I think for now, I think even moving this, no matter what, I think we're safe with that recommendation, because whether it's $1 million towards pension or $1 million towards reducing I think we're safe.
Right,
But
we're just gonna talk about bonding without talking about the CIP.
Right,
And I think and
That is the bonding.
so our recommendation would be increase the pension contributions by $4.5 million, funded through $2 million of excess reserves and $2.5 million of property tax levy. And then the fallback.
The other way around, right?
Right, we did cap it at 2.
Okay, cap it at 2. I would say the fallback would be at least raise it by 2 and do it with the excess reserves, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think our consensus is. If you want to say it's a recommendation, we didn't do a formal vote. I think you know where we are, and if we
I think
need-
we're all in agreement on that.
Yeah.
Look, we would prefer to be on the 100% path. We think that's $4.5 million roughly,
Mhm.
and it can't just come from using excess reserves. There needs to be some willingness to actually increase the property tax levy and and not take it out of the general fund.
Because the future years, we're gonna have to increase the levy.
Well, also, I mean, it just means that it's just like doing alleys or anything else that's routine. It's like, that's the budget, so then we have to decide, how we have to cut in other areas. It should become a regular part of our
So I think that's our consensus that you can take to the meeting.
Sorry, Chair, can you repeat that one more time?
We would like to see the property tax contribution be increased, the pension contribution be increased by $4.5 million to put us on approximately the 100% glide path. And that be funded by a $2 million net increase in the property tax,
A max, no more
Levy?
than.
up to $2 million, and the balance through excess reserves utilization. And we'll continue to reevaluate it. We might have to eventually take that $2.5 million that was in excess reserves, and fund it, longer in the future.
It
we're not
feels
always
like
gonna
there's
have
more
these
than
excess
2.5
reserves.
million in excess reserve.
Incidentally, I didn't win the Powerball, so. Incidentally, I didn't win the Powerball, so,
I'll do it.
don't look to me for the sounds.
But, you know,
Great.
it's sort of a choice, and that, but that would be our consensus, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
And
I think
that's,
that's great.
To be on 100% path.
we've had a discussion, it's the consensus of this committee, we don't even, if we're not gonna vote, whatever, Claire and I can take that to council.
And just off topic, how do we educate the residents? Is there a newsletter or?
So we did ask, Luke, do you know if we're gonna be able to have Tim, because everybody really loves presentations by the board, can we have him give, just because we think it's so important, because I know everybody's about keeping the levy flat, that residents really understand them. Could he, do you know if Daniel?
I will ask the mayor again.
But for those that don't come to meetings, is there some kind of newsletter we send out?
We should,
Like
that would
a
be great.
financial
We should
newsletter
start
or
doing a
something?
financial, I can see, maybe we can, yeah, I think that would be really nice.
I can tell you, we just did a lot of town halls and talked about a $2 million increase in property tax levy, and it was fun.
I'm sure, but this is very dedicated to
No, I
paying
know,
down a debt.
I know, I understand.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will be. I mean, no one, everyone
will
wishes
get-
we were
Yeah,
already
we
at
do
100%.
those charts
Budget
and,
Yeah.
you know, but I just think that it's, first of all, a lot of people don't even know we have this committee, and I think that that's being very fiscally responsible, that you've got almost another layer, and I've told some friends I'm on the committee, but no one knows about it, and, you know, maybe some of the work that we're doing, and.
Yeah. Actually, I already have some little logos, branding. My brother, I should be, I'll share it. Yeah, I think so. I think it would be really good to publicize this more for the education of our residents.
Yeah.
Is there any press on the phone? I mean,
Oh,
this might be reported in the news tomorrow, so.
Anyone
Yes.
can follow our conversation.
We have all of our regular press on the phone right now.
Okay.
Very good.
And so, Melissa, we can count you in this consensus, it sounds like.
Yes. Yes, you
Okay.
can.
And, Councilmember Burns, Councilmember Reed, are you on the phone?
Was there, Councilmember Reed was there. He's there.
Okay.
Councilmember Reed, are you there?
He's not on the phone.
Oh, okay.
Okay, all right. So you have what you need for the, again, we can't answer the bonding question until you know the CIP plan, but with respect to pension, I think we have.
And then is our meeting December 13th?
Second Tuesday, so,
Yeah.
We don't have a regular scheduled meeting in December, though.
no?
Yeah,
And I think we should have.
yeah, that's why
That's another thing we can look at for next year.
Well, the budget will likely have been passed.
Right.
Right.
Doesn't mean.
I mean, it doesn't have to be.
Get together, and at the very least, we need to, publish or discuss our meeting dates for next year.
We need to do that, and I think also, look, we can improve our process here, right? What did we learn? This is the first time we've been through it as a group
No,
this
it's
year.
very, yeah,
I
very
think, what do we really want to think about? Because, we need to get deeper into what are potential asset disposals? What are potential more structural changes to the budget? Are there things we're doing we don't need to do at all, right? So, okay. So you have what you need. Okay. So I think, is there any other business for now?
Are we gonna meet on the 13th?
13th is, fine with me. Yeah, why don't we try to meet on the 13th?
Okay. And back to 7, right?
No. So, 6.
6.
6? Okay.
So we'll meet on, 12/13 at 6 p.m. And that'll be more of a retrospective, hopefully the budget is done by then. More of a retrospective and setting in meeting times for next year. Okay. All right.
Thank you for all your work and everything.
Thank you. And I know it was hard to do the hard work you did on bringing down from the original budget piece and, and the projections that you've done, right? And we'll just increase frequency of our periodic current year reporting and, get better long-term projections. And we'll improve it further next year.
You do an
All right.
official adjournment.
So we are adjourned.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Everyone, good night.
December, what's next year take, right?
If there's any results out yet.
I figure we should say, man.
Great.
What? Oh, tonight, well, I don't think we're gonna have